Yes. Although it's up to you, so you can. Good evening. Good evening, everyone. My name is Jeremy Rutledge, and I am senior pastor here at Circular Congregational Church. And there's going to be some welcome and some instruction. I'm just welcoming you as we begin with this note. Some of you know I've had a little dizziness and a few health things, so I've filmed my pieces and the introduction of Eddie just to play it safe. And then our associate pastor, the Reverend Evelyn Oliveira, is going to help us with some logistics as we begin. So welcome, and Evelyn, could I invite you?
Good evening. As Jeremy said, my name is Evelyn Oliveira, and I'm the associate pastor here. We are so glad that you are here with us, whether you're here on site or whether you're joining us online. We are so glad that you chose to spend this time with us. And here at Circular, we say that whoever you are and wherever you are on life's journey, you are welcome here, and we mean it. A few words of logistics. We thank you for wearing a mask. We try to make all of our gatherings as accessible as possible. And for us, wearing a mask is a way to make it possible for our most vulnerable community members to be present. If you are in need of one, we have more in the back behind those curtains. Also, if you are in need of a restroom, everything that I'm going to tell you right now is behind the green curtains. To the right, you'll see there's one restroom. There are also two more restrooms in the building to the left. It's the only white building on our campus, and underneath the stairs, there are two more restrooms. Let's see, our evening is going to be shaped by a lecture, and then a question and response session, and then we will have a reception in Upper Lance Hall. And Lance Hall is that white building that I was describing. It's 2 stories, and it'll be on the second floor. There are elevators if you need them. Just follow the signs. And at the reception, we're also going to have a book table with books for you to purchase and book signing. We have been looking forward to tonight for a very long time, and we are so glad that you have chosen to join us. Welcome. And Ben, you can play the welcome video.
Good evening, friends. My name is Jeremy Rutledge, and I'm senior minister here at Circular Congregational Church. And on behalf of our church, it is my delight to welcome you to our spring lectures in Theology and Ethics with Professor Eddie Glaude. These lectures were envisioned as a way of bringing the best thinkers in the country to our community to inform and inspire our work together. It was important to us that these lectures be free and open to all. So welcome all. Welcome everybody who is here with us in the sanctuary tonight, church members, friends from the community, students and teachers, justice ministry colleagues, and many others. And welcome to those who are joining us online, tuning in from home, wherever home happens to be. We are glad that you're here. As we begin, I'd like to name my gratitude for all who have worked to make these lectures possible. There are too many people to list, but we begin by thanking the Circular Church Endowment Board for underwriting this lecture series so that everyone may attend at no cost. Thanks to our tireless church staff, including Catherine, Ted, and Charlotte. Thanks to Eddie's team, including Shonda and Holly. Thanks to Skip and the hospitality group for the reception, Susan and the publicity team for their help, our friends from Buxton Books for the book table, and Francis for helping us with all the technology. Thanks to each of you for your time and presence. And thanks to Eddie for returning to us. Tonight marks Eddie's third visit to Circular Congregational Church, and I'm especially grateful for it because we need him in this moment. In the Low Country right now, we are in the midst of the struggle of our lives. We are in the struggle for Black lives, in a place where police audits have been slow and the teaching of Black history is contested. We are in the struggle for women's equal rights, in a place that now denies them, stripping control of their own bodies away at the national level and now in the State House in Columbia. We are in the struggle for transgender people's rights to simply exist, as our trans teachers and students are targeted for discrimination by our school board. We are in the struggle against book bans, voter suppression, and a lack of affordable housing and access to health care. We are in the struggle to protect and preserve our natural home here at sea level as the climate crisis intensifies and the water rises. We are in that old struggle, that beautiful struggle, that ongoing struggle that may rightly be called the freedom struggle. And in this moment, we need each other. And I think we need Eddie too. Eddie S. Glaude Jr. is the James S. McDonald Distinguished University Professor at Princeton University. He has served as the chairperson of the Department of African American Studies from 2015 until this year. Eddie is a frequent contributor to Morning Joe and other popular programs on MSNBC. He is past president of the American Academy of Religion and author of many books and articles, including Begin Again, James Baldwin's America and its urgent lessons for our own, Democracy in Black, How Race Still Enslaves the American Soul, and African American Religion, a very short introduction. Most importantly, Eddie is a truth teller in the mode of James Baldwin. Baldwin said that the role of the writer is to tell as much of the truth as one can bear, and then a little more. That's what Eddie does. That's what we're here for. Friends, there isn't anyone better to help us examine the truth in this moment than Eddie Glaude. Will you join me in welcoming back our real friend and teacher, Professor Eddie Glaude.
Thank you. Thank you, Jeremy, for that gracious introduction, that loving introduction. It makes me blush. It's so wonderful to see you and Sarah again. Wish Ian was here, but he's playing his trumpet. I want to thank all the folks that Jeremy thanked, the staff of Circular who made our gathering today possible, all the folks who worked hard to get me here. I want to thank you. Sister Catherine, Sister Evelyn, it's great to see all of you again. It's a delight to be here, to return to this special church. I'm feeling a bit old these days. Time presses in on you in unexpected ways. To return to this pulpit after so much has happened over these last 3 years. So I'm going to work out some ideas that's going to be in my new book. I think I did some of this with Begin Again, right? Some early chapters, so it makes sense. But to return to this pulpit after so much has happened, it feels like what James Baldwin described in 1972 in No Name in the Street, quote, "There really has been some radical alteration in the structure, the nature of time," end quote. And for me, it isn't so much the sense of fragmentation Baldwin felt after the collapse of the Black freedom movement, as if time and people shattered into pieces. Of course, today people have broken in two, and I'm still trying to write my way out of the abyss to see how the world has cracked wide open. But what I feel now is the compression of time itself, as if past and present have been mushed together with details oozing out, but temporally detached. Compressed or lost, no matter. The details remain amid the ruins like shattered colored bottles, bright red, dusky green, and blue, alongside broken clay pots. Walter Benjamin once asked, quote, "Shouldn't we speak of events which affect us like an echo, once awakened by a sound that seems to have issued from somewhere in the darkness of a past life," end quote. Perhaps a quotation from Eudora Welty answers back, "All that is remembered joins and lives," end quote. I found myself the other day, and it is somewhat surprising to admit it, rereading Ralph Waldo Ellison. It is a surprising admission for me, surprising admission insofar as I've already confessed in Begin Again that Ellison, for me, served as a means to evade any serious grappling with my wounds. Ralph Ellison, the author of Invisible Man. Ellison's mask fit perfectly, I wrote. I enjoyed his cool pose and the sophistication of his ideas. He kept you at a distance while beneath the surface storms rage. Safety, however unsettling, could be found behind that mask. Safety from what, I will admit, is a different question for a different occasion. But the attraction remains even now. I know, although I did not write this on the page then, that Ellison means more to me than a simple evasion of childhood wounds. After all, my son's middle name derives from my love of the old man. My son's name is Langston Ellis. Wounded attachments are nevertheless attachments, yes? And I've come to see, as I return to the work at this stage in my life, that the old man has left his mark on me. Ellison comes into view now as I struggle to understand this current moment in the United States with its contradictions and its deadly betrayals, where race continues to confound this democratic experiment, that contradiction has since the beginning threatened to swallow whole the entire experiment in a form of madness that seizes the moral compass. Ellison haunts, as so many do these days, as I reach for language to offer a way to the other side of this mess, to use a word from Samuel Beckett. A way finally to get out of history's ass pocket in this God-soaked country. I didn't mean to curse in your pulpit, my bad. How do we get out of history's pocket in this God-soaked country? Not to escape history, mind you, but to orient ourselves more appropriately to its demands. Mine is not James Joyce's anxiety. History can be a nightmare, but it can never be left behind. Now, I'm not so much interested in Ellison's politics. The patriotism of his later days scrapes the nerves, nor am I interested, at least on this occasion, in unpacking his view of art and the role of the artist, which borders at times on a kind of aestheticism that I find, especially in moments of political strife, and particularly from the pen of one of those darker souls, a sin against the Holy Ghost. Instead, I'm interested in the role and place of history in how we think about race and democracy, about the madness that results from our evasions, and about what is required of us if we are to imagine ourselves otherwise. Tonight's lecture is about Americans' madness. Tomorrow morning, it's about America's salvation. Ellison, I believe, can be helpful in this regard. As I reached for him in preparation for this lecture, I came across an essay he delivered at a conference in his honor. "Going to the Territory" was the keynote address in a gathering that Michael Harper, the poet, organized in Ellison's honor in September of 1979 at Brown University. In a moment of his life when retirement from NYU was just weeks away, and as he took stock of the time that was left for him as a writer, Ralph Ellison was delighted by the seriousness with which scholars and students engaged his work. He was excited by the unveiling of the watercolor portrait of Inman Page in Rockefeller Library, the first black graduate of Brown. It was the class of 1877. And this man, Inman Brown, was the principal of Douglas High School in Oklahoma, along with his daughter, Zelia Broad. She was Ellison's music teacher. Both of them gave Ralph a sense of the world and of himself. Now, I don't want to go into detail about his tribute to Dr. Page and Mrs. Brough. It is at once beautiful and moving, and I will suspend for this occasion his account of the power of the vernacular in the ongoing shaping of democratic life in this country, although a certain kind of story constitutes the stage upon which the vernacular makes itself known and felt. Instead, it is Ellison's framing reflections on history that grabbed my attention. And it is here that I want to direct yours. Americans continue to stumble over and into the details of the past that made them who they are. Ellison offers several reasons for this. One has to do with the nature of the country's founding and the pace of its development. As he put it, quote, "Given the circumstances of our national origins, our vast geopolitical space, and the improvised character of our society, and given the mind-boggling rapidity of our national growth, perhaps it is understandably difficult for Americans to keep in touch with what has happened to them," end quote. No matter, over the course of the history of the country, a lot has been overlooked or forgotten. Y'all know this in South Carolina for sure. And the result of it all, no matter the reasons, has been what Ellison describes as two basic versions of American history. One which is written and as neatly stylized as an ancient myth, and the other unwritten and as chaotic and full of contradictions, changes of pace, and surprises as life itself, end quote. Americans, he said, can be notoriously selective in the exercise of historical memory. And this self-deceptive magic, he says, he calls it a tricky magic in his 1970 essay, What Would America Be Without Blacks? This tricky magic consists in something more than forgetfulness. It is an alchemy which transforms fears and hatreds into scapegoats and eases the pain and panic of a nation uncertain about who and what it is. An alchemy which transforms fears and hatreds into scapegoats and eases the pain and panic of a nation uncertain about who and what it is. Ellison writes, quote, "Our unwritten history looms as recorded history's obscure alter ego. And although repressed from our general knowledge of ourselves, it is always active in the shaping of events. It is always with us, questioning even when not accusing its acclaimed double, and with the two locked in mute argument which is likely to shock us when it becomes visible during periods of national stress." He goes on to say, "Meanwhile, yearning and thirsting for a rational social order and being forced as human beings to live in what we like to identify as the present, we go on struggling against the built-in conditions which comprise the pathology of American democracy," end quote. Willfully blind to the facts of our experience that would, if attended to, unmask the contradiction between the details of the history we choose to remember and those which we ignore or leave unstated, we find ourselves, Ellison says, in a constant state of debate and contention. This is trying to give you a sense of the debate around the wokeness stuff and the effort to ban books, and what are we doing when we are debating and grappling with the 1619 Project? What is going on here? Here we see in broad outline the features of what might be called Ellison's agonistic view of democracy, a particular way of rendering his idea of antagonistic cooperation, this ongoing contention and debate, as he puts it. That aside, Ellison reveals what is lost in our nationalist insistence to bury the details of our experience, to bury the fact that on the lower frequencies, people like me may speak for people like you. That we lose sight of who and of where and who we are outside of the margins of written history. Outside of the neat and tidy legends lies the messiness of American life, where democracy lives, in spite of the mighty efforts to slay the fire dragon. Democracy lives in the cultural doings and sufferings of everyday people. Ellison calls this the unconscious logic of the democratic process. And he spends much of his time desperately trying to get us to see that despite all of the noise above ground, that underneath this, democratic life is vibrant, subverting categories that constrain, transforming old forms into new ones, making life swing Duke Ellington style. But we cannot forget the dangers that come with the written story. The violence that defends its plots and characters at all cost. I get what Ellison's doing. I get what the old man is up to, but his belief in the spirit of the founding, moving like Hegel's Geist across generations, allows him to have the faith that despite, quote, the unceasing pressure on American principles and beliefs by our equally American blindness and greed, the American project stands and we must honor that. I have to deal with this every other day with Joe Scarborough. His faith is unshakable. And for me, that is the patriotism that grates the nerve, with the safety net that our unwritten history is always at work in the background. And here the debate and contention of American life and politics on Ellison's view seems a bit genteel when it comes to these different versions of our history. It seems to me that the battle over the written story is not resolved by pointing to the work of the unwritten one. Much more is required of us, especially if we are to do more than stumble about with the wobbly legs of a toddler. Who we take ourselves to be, our commitments to the values that evidence our view of the good and the just are often bound up with the stories we tell about our doings and sufferings. We have to fight for those values. We have to fight for those stories. Losing sight of this, it seems to me, leaves us not only in history's ass pocket, but makes asses of us all. Today, Jeremy, we find ourselves, and there's no reasonable way to deny this, in a moment of profound crisis. You outlined it in your introduction, and you're welcome. America is changing, and the substance of that transformation is not clear. Americans are divided, and those divisions go well beyond ideological differences. They cut to the marrow of the bone. Too often we see each other as enemies. Disagreement is saturated with contempt. Mutuality drowns in the bitterness of our public discourse. The sense of common purpose and public good has been thrown into the trash bin as we huddle in our silos. And race shadows it all. Great replacement theory, panic and terror around demographic shifts, assaults on voting rights, assaults on women's rights, assaults on LGBTQ plus rights, right? As if we're relitigating the 1960s. Bitter debates about American history. We find ourselves living among men and women mad with the fever of a distorted view of liberty, willing to throw away this entire experiment in democracy as they cling to their fantasies. We are changing, indeed. But as James Baldwin put it, the horror quote is that America changes all the time without ever changing at all. To be sure, there are a set of principles that define this republic, principles articulated at the initial moment of its creation. Quote, "We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, all men sick are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." But those ideas have always been contested, fought over, blood spilt in the name of them. There has been and remains something lurking in the shadows, something not so easily captured by phrases like our better angels or progress towards a more perfect union or faith in the founding principles. A closer look exposes the gap at the moment of creation. A closer look exposes the gap at the moment of creation between the stated ideals and the lived practices that unravel them. And the lies we tell ourselves split an emerging national consciousness in two. What do we make of the fact that we've been lying to ourselves since the beginning about who we are and what we have done? A lie repeatedly told becomes a uniquely American form of madness that haunts the nation still. It seems to me, if we are sincere, and the question of sincerity is always a vexing issue in this country. Lionel Trilling taught us that, didn't he? We have to face the insidious workings of this lie, this particular written version of American history, if we are to imagine America anew. The time has come for us to examine ourselves for who we really are and in the full light of what we've done, and we must do so without the crutch of our myths and legends about American exceptionalism, legends that protect our innocence. That examination must involve an attempt, to use Baldwin's words again, to find out what is really happening here. The refusal to confront this reality has resulted in our not knowing who we really are. There's an incoherence at the heart of American identity, a disassociation. Madness here is a metaphor for the interior life of the nation and the interior life of the people who have to bear the brunt of it all. What is fascinating is that in his address upon receiving the National Book Award in 1953 for Invisible Man, Ralph Ellison noted, quote, "The way home we seek is the condition of man being at home in the world, which is called love." That'll preach. He says, "The way home we seek is the condition of man being at home in the world, which is called love, and which we term democracy." Democracy as a disinterested form of love. Our task, then, Ellison says, is always to challenge the apparent forms of reality, that is, the fixed manners and values of the few, and to struggle with it until it reveals its mad, very implicated chaos, its false faces, and on until it surrenders its insight, its truth, end quote. Ellison would declare that America has yet to discover itself. He understood that we were not, in fact, at home in the world, that there was something quite loveless about this place. And what would that mean for our idea of democracy? There's something loveless about this place. Aren't we experiencing that today? But here, perhaps, I'm yoking the old man too closely to that other figure who matters so much to me, James Baldwin. In No Name in the Street, Jimmy put it this way, quote, "I've always been struck in America by an emotional poverty so bottomless and a terror of human life, of human touch, so deep that virtually no American appears able to achieve any viable organic connection between his public stance and his private life. This is what makes them so baffling, so moving, so exacerbating, and so untrustworthy," end quote. And in No Name in the Street, he tells the story about this powerful white liberal in the South. With a phone call, he could save you from a lynching or cause you to be lynched. And he tells the story of this white liberal who gets too drunk and with milky eyes reaches for his crotch. A loveless touch. A loveless touch. Baldwin declared in 1964 America is no place for love. But it is his formulation in 1960 at Kalamazoo College that takes us to the heart of the matter, I believe. He says, quote, "I want to suggest most seriously that before we can do very much in the way of clear thinking or clear doing as it relates to the minorities in this country, we must first crack the American image and find out and deal with what it hides. We cannot discuss the state of minorities until we first have some sense of what we are, who we are, what our goals are, and what we take life to be," quote, end quote. It is damn near impossible to get at these questions because madness congests the heart of this place. They, Baldwin wrote, do not really know what it is they are afraid of, but they know that they are afraid of something, and they are so frightened that they're nearly out of their damn minds. We have to confront this madness that sits at the heart of this experiment. We must tap the root. We have to toss aside the illusions and fantasies that protect our innocence, or less dramatically, we have to challenge the written version of American history. It is a central battleground. Again, Baldwin, quote, "What is most terrible is that American white men are not prepared to believe my version of the story, to believe that it happened. In order to avoid believing that, they have set up in themselves a fantastic system of evasions, denials, and justifications." I should have just wrote Ron DeSantis. Tim Scott. They've set up in themselves a fantastic system of evasions and denials and justifications, which is about to destroy their grasp of reality, which is another way of saying their moral sense. He goes on to say, "What I'm trying to say is that the crime is not the most important thing here. What makes our situation so serious in this country is that we have spent so many generations pretending that it did not happen. And I'm trying to suggest, however clumsily, is that this is a form of madness." And just to be clear, what else is double consciousness but a form of madness? The nation's madness has an implication for those who have to bear the brunt of it. Ellison's essay, Harlem is Nowhere, with the madman hurling imaginary bombs at cars. August Wilson's cycles of plays, where mad men and women function like the chorus, where they are the bearers of truth. A kind of madness that disrupts what stands in for reason. Just a few years. Y'all being patient with me? Just a few years before he delivered his talk at Brown, Ellison found himself in Cambridge. I don't want to mention Harvard, but I guess I have to. As he addressed the Harvard class of 1949 on its 25th anniversary. This is Black power dominated the political scene. The crisis of Watergate raged. Richard Nixon would soon become the first president to resign off his office. The country felt like it was coming apart at the seams. And Ellison took the stage with a clear-eyed sense of the perils facing the nation. He told the story of what happened in the summer of 1953 when he was last on Harvard's campus. He had stumbled upon the wall of Memorial Hall. If you're ever on Harvard's campus, it's stunning, actually. And the hall is engraved with the names of Harvard men killed in the Civil War. It was a moment of revelation that these men, Ellison said, had given their lives in part for his freedom, and that he had lived his life unaware of this indebtedness. Quote, "Standing there, I was ashamed of my ignorance," Ellison told the students, "and of the circumstances that had assigned these young men to the shadows of our historical knowledge. The nation had turned its back on the sacrifices of these men and had, quote, repressed the details of the shameful abandonment of those goals for which they had given their lives. That betrayal of both the ideal of democracy and the memory of those who gave their lives for it haunted the nation. It was a denial of the past, of history and its relevance to American life, and its significance to any robust sense of American individuality and identity. Quote, "A discontinuity had been imposed by the living," Ellison said. And that heroic gesture, their heroic gestures had been repressed along with the details of the shameful abandonment of those goals for which they had given up their lives, all to maintain an American innocence in the face of the evil, quote, "which sprung from our good intentions," end quote. But for Ellison, innocence misnames the ethical blindness. Hubris is a better word, he argues. A tragic flaw in our national character and perception accompanied by arrogance and insolence. For him, the most damaging form of insolence and pride in the drama of American society was racism. It cripples our imaginations, it deforms our moral sense, and distorts our character. And we've developed extensive rituals to evade it all, to put the ugliness of the past, of our past and present aside, rituals to forget. Forgetfulness that makes us vulnerable to the ghosts of our national past and the ugliness of our present. The struggles of the mid-20th century brought all of this to the fore, Ellison declared. The Civil War had not yet been settled. The Civil War had not yet been settled, and Tim Scott announcing his presidency in front of Fort Sumter. Ironies of all ironies, yes? The Civil War had not been settled. These struggles, those struggles, even in the face of the intense white backlash of the Nixon era, offered the nation an opportunity to face up to the reality, Ellison said, of the Americanness of American diversity and to the past which made us what we are. And then he quotes T.S. Eliot, "What we have inherited from the fortunate, we have taken from the defeated." We must not forget that what has made us who we are. We must not forget what has made us who we are. We must not forget. Can you imagine what Harry Belafonte felt as he took his last breath? The old man, Ellison, in this instance, seems to place the accents on different syllables just 6 years prior to his words at Brown University. A lot happened, I suppose, between 1974 and the dawn of the age of Reagan. Ellison and Baldwin understood, no matter the differences in their temperament, that the terrors and panic we experience have everything to do with the gap between who we imagine ourselves to be and who deep down we really are. We live in that gap, and it locks this country into a kind of perpetual adolescence where those who desperately hold on to the American myth as some kind of New World Eden refuse to grow up. And this is what June Jordan refers to as that nasty American habit of genteel make-believe. We have to grow up. I've been saying this from this pulpit for 3 times. How shall we put ourselves in touch with reality? How shall we put ourselves in touch with reality? We must leave behind the sentimentality. No more milky-eyed liberals. We must finally bury the view that desperately needs black folk to be the sick men and women of our democracy. If we are to finally break loose from it all, we must describe us to ourselves as we are now, Baldwin says, and then to borrow a phrase from Henry James, at the pitch of passion. And that requires that we crack open the American image and find out and deal with what it hides. We have to fight for that different version of American history, as yet unwritten. Ellison held steadfast to his faith in America until his last breath. Justified the Vietnam War, wrapped himself in the flag. I wrote every one of my essays in graduate school my first year on Ralph Ellison. And Arnold Rampersad, who is Ellison's biographer, wrote the biography, and he gave me a copy of the proofs. I read it, and Ellison broke my heart. I didn't like the man. So he held steadfast to his faith until his last breath. Jimmy was brokenhearted in his last days. He saw what the country had become. And in his last interview with Quincy Troop in November of 1987, he would be dead the following month, he said, quote, "I was right. I was right about what was happening in the country. What was about to happen to all of us, really, one way or the other, and the choices people would have to make, and watching people make them and denying them at the same time. I don't care who says what. I watched it happen, and all of this because they want to be white. Because it's the only way to justify the slaughter," end quote. Madness abounds still. And I don't mean to suggest some clinical or medical notion of madness. Remember, it's my metaphor for the interior life of the nation and the interior to bear the brunt of the madness itself. I will leave that medical notion, that medicalized notion, to those who want to keep their guns and say that the real problem rests with the mental health of the killers. We are not who we say we are in this country, and mirrors keep revealing the truth that makes paranoia a decided feature of our political lives. We suffer from a kind of national schizophrenia. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. put it this way in his last book, Where Do We Go From Here? Chaos or Community, quote, "Ever since the birth of our nation," this is King now, "ever since the birth of our nation, white America has had a schizophrenic personality on the question of race. She has been torn between selves, a self in which she proudly professed the great principles of democracy and a self in which she sadly practices the antithesis of democracy. No one surveying the moral landscape of our nation can overlook the hideous wreckage of commitment twisted and turned to 1,000 shapes under the stress of prejudice and irrationality," end quote. That's King. No matter how many mirrors we shatter or leave face down in the Rio Grande, we can't seem to escape the reality that drives us mad. Unwritten histories are not enough, old man. That's me speaking back to Ellison. From Frederick Douglass to W.B. Du Bois, from Harriet Jacobs to Toni Morrison, African-American writers, alongside many others, have tried to lay bare the meaning and implication of the written version of American history, the story as neatly stylized as ancient myth. They spoke of the madness that results from it all, that the disorienting and disquieting gap between who we say we are as Americans and what we actually do cast a disturbing shadow over this place that feels heavy, like South Carolina summers in August. We're desperately afraid of being exposed, I think particularly to ourselves. And this fear has led to a kind of delirium that erupts repeatedly in unimaginable violence. In my first book, Exodus, I tell this story of the beginning of the 4th of July celebrations. Before 4th of July became a celebration of Independence Day, it was actually the day used by a particular society to raise money, the colonization society, to raise money to send free black folk back to Liberia, to send them to Africa. And when this holiday, July 4th, became the Independence Day celebration in places like New York, if black people would show up to the parade, they would physically be attacked. Why? Because they embodied the contradiction of what was being celebrated. This is more than a battle between our better and lesser angels. That's a punch at John Meacham. It's more than a battle between our better and lesser angels. That is a fight we all experience, a consequence perhaps of the debacle in the Garden of Eden. Original sin stains American madness but does not exhaust it. Ours is the effect of refusing at every turn and across generations to accept who we are, to prefer illusion and fantasy over responsibility. The white well makes us all mad. And in 1993, I'm coming to a close, I promise. I'm taxing your patience. Y'all all right? See, some people will come in here and just give you a talk that I'm trying to give you a talk. In a 1993 interview with Charlie Rose, the late novelist Toni Morrison spoke of this madness. Rose asked Morrison, quote, "Do you, Pulitzer Prize winner, successful, honored in the halls of academia, etc., still have the encounter with racism?" End quote. Morrison looked disappointed in the question. Perhaps more so in Rose, as she pursed her lips and said with a smoke-laden softness, "Yes, I do, Charlie, but let me tell you, that's the wrong question." Okay, what's the right question, Rose asked. Quote, "How do you feel?" Not you, Charlie Rose, but don't you understand that the people who do this thing, who practice racism, are bereft? There is something distorted about the psyche. It's a huge waste, and it's a corruption and a distortion. It's like a profound neurosis that nobody examines for what it is. It feels crazy. It is crazy, and it has just as much of a deleterious effect on white people, and possibly equal, than it does on black people, end quote. And here Morrison channels her reading of Herman Melville's classic novel Moby Dick and its crazed character Captain Ahab and his obsession with the white whale. For her, the whale is, quote, more than blind and different nature. It represents perhaps the consolidation of whiteness as an ideology, as a way of seeing and being, of valuing certain bodies over others that swallow everything else whole. Quote, "If the white whale," this is Morrison in 1988, "if the white whale is the ideology of race, what Ahab has lost to it is personal dismemberment and family and society and his own place as a human being in the world. The trauma of racism is for the racist and the victim, the severe fragmentation of the self, and has always seemed to me a cause, not a symptom, of psychosis," end quote. And this reality demands what Ellison labeled a tricky magic. The disassociation, the incoherence at the heart of American identity, which is revealed over and over again, demands something to reconcile it. And so we engage in this ritual practice, what Baldwin called the price of the ticket. Whether we're referring to the Aaron in the wilderness of Puritans escaping European persecution, or to those who made their way to Ellis Island for something they thought was freedom, that journey required they leave something behind and narrow their understanding of themselves and of the world. They had to become white. That's the tricky magic. An ideology that says that in spite of what we know to be know and feel to be incoherent, that when we understand ourselves as somehow bound through this ideology, we're fine. So we will create the scapegoat, that alchemy that allows us to feel a sense of community, Tucker calls. That alchemy. Have you ever looked at the photos of lynchings? Not just the cruel barbarity, but the community that is being constituted in the face of it. The scapegoat is always that means by which the community consolidates itself. It hides the frayed edges. Baldwin says they had to become white. They weaved stories to account for it all, and the costs were unimaginable. Baldwin says, quote, "This incredibly limited, not to say dim-witted ambition has choked many a human being to death here. And I would add, has driven most of us mad." I was sitting in Union Station the other day, and something didn't feel right. Madness was angry. One young woman dressed in a tattered blue jogging suit and slides with colorful, mismatched socks. her hair matted and locked randomly on one side of her head, screamed at this white man looking at the train station. "There ain't no food in this damn trash." She commandeered the monitor, stood right in front of it. Everyone had to see her. She stormed away shouting. She looked into another trash bin. "Shit, ain't nothing in here either," she said. Another woman, weathered with loose skin hanging under her cropped shirt, argued with herself. "I talk to myself all the time," she said. "This ain't schizophrenia." She rummaged through the trash. A young black man quietly approached me, asked if I could help him get something to eat. He stands at a distance, scratching his head. I give him $20. I tell him to share. He says he will and leaves. About 10 minutes later, he returned, scratched his head, and said quietly, "Thank you." After taking it all in, I thought again of Ellison's essay, "Harlem is Nowhere," and his description of the madmen hurling imaginary bombs in Harlem. I thought again of August Wilson's cycle of plays. What have been the cost of this madness for all of us? What has been the cost of this madness? What might it mean to make a radical, courageous choice when madness abounds? Not just a virtue signal, not just to say that you're good, but to do the work to help us be different. What might it mean to make a radical, courageous choice when madness abounds, to fight for that unwritten version of history in the face of fever dreams that have spiked again? As Ellison ended his remarks on that evening in September of 1979 at Brown University, the old man knew, I suspect, that something more was required. He said, perhaps if we learn more of what has happened, this is Ellison now, if we learn more of what has happened and why it happened, we will learn more of who we really are. And perhaps if we learn more about our unwritten history, we won't be so vulnerable to the capriciousness of events as we are today. End quote. There it is again. There it is again. Perhaps Ellison, mad with his own unshakable faith, was engaged in a kind of tricky magic. No matter the safety and security of that unwritten history as the old man understood it is not enough. We have to tell ourselves a different story. We have to fight for the values those stories commend if we are to be released from madness into a new creation. We have to finally bury that old self and be born again. What is the source of that salvation? That will be my lecture tomorrow morning. Talk to you. Thank you. Do I stay from up here on high?
Wherever you want. Thank you again, Professor Glaude. And your words are so powerful, and there's so much truth that we are not hearing. So I want to invite everyone just to take a minute, just to take a couple of breaths, just to take in what we have heard today. And as we move to a time of question and response, you're going to be invited to ask questions. And during question and response times, there's usually about 5 different types of questions. So I would like to share those with you as a guidelines for how we want to go about our time. So the first example of a question is that a participant will tell a story that they really want everyone to hear. This is often very interesting, but it's not a question. Number two, the second example, is that a participant will offer a thought that they have had for the speaker or for the group's consideration. This is often very interesting, but also not a question, unless they're asking for feedback on their thought. The third example is that a participant will actually ask a question, a clear question. That's what we're aiming for. The fourth example is that a participant will combine the first two or three and tell a story, then share a thought in order to ask a question. And this takes up too much time. Lastly, this is a tricky one. A participant, not quite sure of what they want to say, will share a winding combo of words, thoughts, and stories, and then say, I don't really know what my question is. So, while we truly value your thoughts and stories in the interest of letting as many people participate as possible, we ask that you take a few moments and think about your question and how you're going to state it clearly, and try to hold it to 1 minute, definitely no more than 2. And a reminder, we often overtalk because we're not confident that our question has any meaning, when in reality, your questions, your simple questions, are just fine. And our first question, our model, is going to be Jeremy.
I feel like we're being managed.
Those are all rules for preachers, I think. But here's my question. Eddie, could you just say a word about how you understand hope in this moment?
Yeah, in Begin Again, I came across this, I write about this in Begin Again. I came across this moment in Baldwin's life in Istanbul. It's 1970. He's still grappling with failed relationships, attempted suicide, the assassination of Dr. King. He's coming out of a deep depression. And a reporter from Ebony asks him about hope at a party. And I imagine that party, Jimmy probably had been drinking heavily, some Johnny Walker Black. And he turns to him and he smiles, that toothy smile. And he says, hope is invented every day. And when I came across that line, it puzzled me. But it makes sense even in our current moment. If you have to invent hope every day, it means that you have to beat back despair every day. You have to figure out how to swing your feet off the bed and plant them on the floor and get up. And you have to do that in the face of forces, right, that seem overwhelming. But it's a blues-soaked hope. B.B. King's Nobody Loves Me But My Mother, and she could be jiving too. Right? So my hope is in us. The fact that human beings are disasters and miracles all at once. And if I didn't have hope and faith in us, even though the evidence suggests otherwise, I couldn't get up. As I've said from this pulpit often, I would drink too much Irish whiskey, right? And so from whence the hope is my abiding faith in the capacity of human beings to be otherwise. Let me give you a quick example, because I know we have more questions. There was nothing about the condition of the enslaved to lead her to believe that she could be anything but a slave. Nothing. It is a relation of domination defined by utter brutality and cruelty. But imagine he or she sees someone in front of her who could be taken away at the drop of a dime. but she sees the glimmer of love in their eyes, a sense of unconditional love. Or imagine in the midst of all of that violence, she hears outside the cabin children who will see unimaginable cruelty at any moment laughing, innocence. And that glitter of love, that sound of innocence, affords some elbow room, so that, to use Charles Long's language, so that that slave could see beyond the opacity of her condition and imagine an otherwise. So much so that when slavery is abolished, what do these people do? They start walking. Such and such was sold from such and such plantation, and they said he went to Mississippi. I'm trying to find such and such. So you see one of the most extraordinary moments in American history. These people who were supposedly rendered no different than chattel, literally walking south to find people they love who were sold from them. Hope in the darkest, dankest spaces. In us, in you. Right? And at the same time, I'm not naive. We're miracles and we're disasters. Is that a way to answer? That was melodramatic, but I've been... Can I come down from up here and grab a mic? Because I want to get down there with you. Can y'all see me back there? Come down here? Thank you so much.
You have a question, you can raise your hand.
You can ask me anything. That doesn't mean I'm going to answer. Remember I said that.
Sorry. Hi.
Are we good with the camera here if I'm down here for the folks online? I just want to make sure. Okay, good. Yes, I just can't go down any farther. I got to stay up here. I'll show the ball spot like they do on MSNBC. My mother tells me, why do they keep coming behind your head?
Hi, I'm Madison. I'm a student at the college. And you can stand. Hi. My question is, I'm sorry, I'm gonna try to make this quick. You can kind of make me nervous with your guidelines. So we've been learning about apocalyptic rhetoric in religion and politics, and in one of my religion classes. And so my question is, and also quoting James Baldwin, that what has come about in religious identity is doctrine over love. Mm-hmm. And so do you think that apocalyptic prophecies and doctrine has seeped too much into our politics, calling that divisiveness, and that has triumphed over the love that's supposed to come out of religion? And if so, like, how do we get back to the core love instead of the doctrine?
That's a great question. That's a wonderful question. Yes, there is a certain kind of articulation of Christianity with politics that, to my mind, is very dangerous in our current moment. It's been dangerous for a while. It's become very difficult to disentangle white evangelicalism from a certain political stance. We're calling it now explicitly white Christian nationalism, right? And what you get is the sanctification of a particular ideology. We've always had this problem, though. Frederick Douglass says that the slave auction block was next to the church steeple. The adjectives actually matter. Black Christianity and white Christianity. Black Christianity, as Howard Thurman suggests, is that particular Christian witness that the slave dared to redeem the religion profaned in his midst. The idolatry of whiteness in this moment, right? So there's a sense in which there is a kind of attempt to sanctify, sacralize a particular kind of politics, right? And we're seeing it across the board. It's evidenced in a number of our debates right now. How do we counter it? I think one way we counter it is with a much more robust articulation or voicing of our democratic commitments. That's one way to do it. The other way is for Christians to get busy and start making the case that that particular understanding, that particular interpretation of the gospel is not right. So at the moment in which white evangelicals claim to be evangelists, Reverend Bishop William Barber claims to be evangelical. He claims evangelicalism as a description of his own faith. And he wants to have an argument on Christian grounds with these same folk. So part of the work that has to be done is not to banish religious language or Christian language from the public sphere altogether, because that's dangerous, right? I think what's required is a robust response from Christians, right? And we're not hearing that in the way that we should. And part of the reason why we're not hearing it is because they're so damn loud. And we're so damn genteel. You see? I think it's really important for Christians, right? Remember, the prophetic is always in the minor key. It's always been in the minor key. But hey, I'm a blues man. There's something about that minor key that gives you something. You see what I mean? I was about to start preaching that, but go ahead. Yes, we have a question. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Because I think secularizing the public domain is dangerous. You can't do that. Yeah.
My apologies for not necessarily addressing your presentation.
That's all right.
Taking advantage of you being here locally. Would you give a response to the thought that I'm sure you've heard before, which is they love our culture, but they hate us? Could you just talk about that? Because you're in Charleston, South Carolina, where there is an ongoing embracing of the historical African-derived person under the guise of newfound respect. And for those of us who are of this community, we're having problems with the loving our culture, but continuing to hate us.
If I understand you, in Democracy in Black, I wrote about the ways in which oftentimes people in this country think of racial justice as a philanthropic enterprise, as a charitable gesture, and how that view among liberals or conservatives reproduce this notion of the value gap, this belief that some people value more than others. But the issue for us is not the loud racist. It's never been. The issue for us are those who believe they're decent, but who hold the view that they possess equality to give to us. Right? That equality is not your possession to give. And there's also the view that tags along with this philanthropic approach, this charitable understanding, that we should be grateful to be here. And that gratitude should be expressed in a kind of loyalty to the country, a kind of thankfulness to the country. Shut up and dribble, LeBron. Right? All of which is rooted in the idea that this country is a white nation in the vein of old Europe, that the diversity that is at the heart of our founding gets erased in that particular picture. So, and there's also, let me say add another component, there's also a paranoia to the expectation of gratitude. And the paranoia, we could trace it all the way back to Jefferson's notes, that given the way we've treated these particular people, they are always on the road to being traitors in our midst. They are always the danger because they are not loyal to the country because of the way the country has treated them. So there's always a suspicion, right? It's the great scandal of Black life. That is to say, King's invocation of love, right? We try to normalize it, right? Not understanding that that's the miracle. The invocation of love in the face of this country's history, is miraculous, when in fact, human history in the face of this kind of brutality, it's what? Rage. It's the bent twig lashing back. So part of what we have here is this division, that the country belongs to them and the rest of us should be grateful. Am I understanding the question? I want to make sure I'm understanding the question. Okay? And so when we're seeing this play itself out, liberty is for them, authority is for the rest of us. Liberty is for them, the rule of law for the rest of us. They just want to be free while the rest of us need to just simply submit to the authoritarian regime that they're in. How do we respond to it? Directly. Directly. This country's mine too. I'm not ceding it to anyone. And part of what we have to do is to tell the truth about who we are and what we've done. Telling the truth then sets the stage for reconciliation, which then sets the stage for repair. You see the three stages? So tell the truth. My great-grandmama is buried in Mississippi, in Moss Point, Mississippi, across the bridge that used to be Escataba. My great-grandmother, who used to cook the best pinto beans on the planet, make you forget about me. And you gonna tell me that this place is not mine? That I'm supposed to be grateful because you are trying to be decent? Kiss mine. You see the move? Part of what we have to do, and this is not being rageful, this is a demand of how we ought to engage. Right? In Democracy in Black, I said, we have to stop dancing. Because it takes two. And so what I try to do every day in a way that's, I think, I hope is compelling. I've had it, I think, over the course of these 7, 8 years I've been on Morning Joe with Joe Scarborough, I think I've had an impact. When I first started having conversations with Joe, Joe said, if I was in Congress today, I would be a member of the Tea Party. He said it. But then now listen to what there's decency, right? And so part of what has to happen, right, is not for us to quiet ourselves, right? Not for us to concede the terms, but to claim the country, to reject racial justice as a philanthropic enterprise, right? Right? And to understand that if we're a truth bearer, if we bear witness, we set the conditions for reconciliation so that you and I can actually get to know each other, so that mutuality can actually grow, right? Where stereotype doesn't stand in for me or for you. And in love, together, if we are willing to risk ourselves, the New Jerusalem is possible. But we have to be willing to risk. I'm going to say this really quickly, because I know we have more questions. I'm so verbose. My mother used to pay me to be quiet. She did. It was not much. It was a quarter. But you get the point. They pay me much more now. The intimacy of our hatreds. The intimacy of our hatreds. The woman who accused Emmett Till, she just passed. People knew who killed that baby. who tied the fan around the baby's neck and threw him into the Tallahatchie River. You know how they knew him? They played checkers with him. They drank beer with him. They ate dinner around the dinner table with him. People know who stormed the Capitol on January 6th. They're your neighbors. They work at the fire department. They coach soccer. People we love. People you love. You know that you're here. Our worlds are so segregated, right? We're going to leave and we're going to go into our hyper-segregated spaces and we're going to hear all the things we hear. And we're not going to hold any of the people we love accountable because we don't want to get through that. The intimacy of our hatreds, where our hatreds grow and fester, right? In those spaces where y'all just say, I don't want to talk about it now. You just watch your Fox News. I'm not going to talk about it. Don't bring that to the dinner table tonight. Right? And because we don't deal with the intimacy of the hatred, it grows. It's passed on from generation to generation. It's not just structures, right? It lives in the marrow of our day-to-day lives, right? So we got a lot of work to do. Tell the truth. The truth sets the stage for reconciliation. Reconciliation is that we're going to have to break down those barriers, get into the intimate spaces where we can risk ourselves with each other, where we can trust that I can risk myself with you. And then that becomes the basis for repair, it seems to me. Does that make sense? Yeah. Any more questions? Yes.
Hi.
Hi.
Gosh. There are a lot of educators at Circular, and a lot of us are hearing you through those ears and with that lens. And I think that Ellison said that the only thing that was missing from American education was the imagination. And it seems to me that you're saying that that may have been by design and intent. And so I'd like to ask you, what does it look like for imagination to take hold in our American educational systems so that they sing and accomplish these things that need to happen?
It's so beautiful, and it's going to show up tomorrow. You anticipate what I'm going to say tomorrow. What's the group that Plato has to ban from the Republic in order for the Republic to work? He has to ban the poets. He has to ban the poets. The imagination is the battleground. You know, for Shelley, the imagination is the species of the good. Right? Our ability to see ourselves in the most expansive of terms. And imagination carries with it, I'm going to talk about this on tomorrow, right? That sense of sympathy or empathy that allows you to see beyond your own interest and self into what? To see yourself in relation to another human being. And so when the imagination is assaulted so that we can't see our lives, ourselves in the most expansive of terms, the only thing we can do is see ourselves as what? Self-interested persons in competition and rivalry with each other. I just gave you a technical definition of the political rationality of neoliberalism without all that academic language. But when we think for the last 40 years that how we understand the good, right? We're just all out to pursue our own aims and ends in competition and rivalry with each other. And what have we seen over the last 40 to 50 years? An erosion, an evisceration of any robust notion of the public good. So much so that people don't even want to put on their damn mask. I'm in South Carolina. Let me step back up here. I forgot I need to put mine back on. Right? Sorry. Right? We don't have a robust conception of the public good. And so what does it mean to think about the imagination as the space for us to imagine a different relationship to each other? That is to say, not a common, right? But a different set of moral obligations. that if you and I are in community together, what does it mean to say that if you're sick, we got you. You're not going to lose everything because you're sick. What does it say about us as a people if we say that no matter what's your color, what's your gender, what's your zip code, we're going to offer you the best education that this country can provide. We're going to educate all of our children. We've never done that in this country. Why? Right? What is the baseline agreement for us to be together? And that's going to require a kind of imaginative leap. Because at the heart of it, and we have to admit this, some people want us to believe that we don't have enough because they're taking it all. Right? I've said this on television many a times. I said, people want us to believe that there's only so much pie to go around. That's because they've taken half of it. I'd rather for us to just bake a bigger damn pie. But that requires the imaginative leap, right? The imaginative leap. So the imagination is key. I'm going to talk about it tomorrow. It's absolutely key. Plato has to ban the poets for a reason, because the poets offer us languages, vocabularies to see the world in different terms. Yes. We have another question. She's coming.
We probably have time for two more, so the two hands, that'd be perfect.
There's one over here, and then we come over. Thank y'all for enduring me.
Hi.
Hi.
My name's Lily. I'm a senior at College of Charleston, and I was wondering what advice, if any, you have for young people who are coming out of educational spheres where it's so theoretical, and how to put some of these things that you've been discussing into practice, especially as a white person, how to try to be helpful without hurting. Obviously, I understand, I'm not looking for a specific answer, but just if you have any thoughts or advice on young people entering the world.
In opposition to each other. The thinking and the doing aren't in opposition to each other, right? What I try to do every single day is to bring the photography to bear on the news in the context of a soundbite, right? So that's what I want to do. So I read deeply and widely, and I'm trying to figure out how to bring that to bear on the matters. So take all that you've learned over these 4 years at the College of Charleston and figure out how to act in the world, right? The second point I would make, right, is just get clear on your commitments. How do we help, right? King was asked that question at a conference, at a rabbinical conference with Abraham Joshua Heschel. Rabbi Heschel was conducting or curating a Q&A, and he was talking about the Poor People's Campaign, and someone asked him, how can I help? And before he answered the question, he said, we have to admit that racism still occupies the throne of this nation. That's King. Admit that racism still occupies the throne of this nation. And until we admit that, we will find ourselves right here. So that admission, and then being clear about what you're committed to without exception. See, this is the thing about the country. We give voice to our values, but we always tie it to the exception. We believe X except for the native peoples. We believe X except for women. We believe X except for black people. We believe X except for for immigrants. We believe X. We always have the exception. What are your commitments without the exception? And then act on it. That's the key, right? And then remember, the last point I would make is a point that Baldwin said. He was at a congressional hearing with Betty Shabazz, the widow of Malcolm X, and he said, I'm skeptical of people who want to do something for me as opposed to with me. So don't do something for people. Engage in that solidaristic work with people, and together we're gonna build a new Jerusalem. Yes.
Thank you. Hi. My question probably is a little bit more maybe practical or logistical as opposed to philosophical, and kind of leaning on an earlier comment about some folks being genteel and others being loud. One thing that it just seems to be a real difficulty is that, you know, there are people who are desirous and purposeful about wanting change, wanting goodness, wanting love, wanting equality, all of those things. But particularly, I think as it relates to government bodies and media, certainly media, those people are more in the camp, laden with bias and judgment here, of doing things the honorable way, being honest, telling the truth, and playing by the rules. And you've got other camps, such as the white Christian nationalists, you know, very right-wing, radical conservatives. I'm sorry. Oh, okay, sorry. And authoritarian groups. They're quite willing to lie, to break the rules. You know, a lot of our Supreme Court has been developed, you know, along those lines. And I'm wondering, I mean, you're obviously, you know, very prominent in the media. Well, you know, how do you navigate? Because we're in the same waters.
Right.
But how do you maintain your honesty, your goodness, your approach, and fairness when you're constantly confronted by the other camp, for lack of a better word, breaking the rules, and then it seems like the genteel is bending over backwards towards things like
I got you.
equitable. It's not the term I was looking for.
I got it.
Equivalent, you know, false equivalence.
No, I got
is
it.
what I'm talking about.
I got it. Thank you so much for that question. It's in our current political discourse, the terms are rigged in such a way that one side expects the other side to be civil. It's part of the calculus. See, this is the thing. People are using democratic means for undemocratic ends. And in order to do so, it presumes that you're going to act within the norms of democratic civil society. And when you don't, there's pearl clutching. You're a hypocrite. You see, the moment you punch back, right? You get called out for not being committed to what you say you're committed to. So it's we have to be very, very mindful of how people are using democratic means for undemocratic ends. This is why I love Nicole Wallace. She comes from that tribe. She gave us Sarah Palin. It's her fault. And Steve Schmidt, right? And what is she doing every single day? She's fighting in a way, right, where she's punching back. We have to fight for the world we want. They're fighting for the world they want. And if we don't fight as forcefully, it doesn't mean we have to lie, steal, cheat, and do all the things, but we have to fight for the world we want. It's the same thing when we allow the people we love to be filled with hate and not hold them to account. It's the same thing, you see? And so part of what we have to do, I think, right, is to speak back with power. Look what Disney's doing to Ron DeSantis. It's like popping him in the mouth. And you don't have to be a corporatist. You don't have to. I loathe Disney World. Have you ever been there? It's like being on. You can't buy anything else but that, right? Right? I just had it was triggered. I was triggered. But the way Bob Iger is fighting is an example of how we have to fight for democracy. If we don't, it's over. It's going to be a wrap. Because let me just say this really quickly. I know we got to go. When Ron DeSantis enters, when he declares he's going to enter the race, everybody below him it's going to be an all-out assault on him. Because they're afraid to attack Trump. So they're going to attack him, and his skin is rice paper thin. So he's not going to survive it. Trump is going to get indicted by Fani Willis in Georgia. That's the danger. Jack Smith is coming. He's about to be broke in a minute after the civil trial, right? If someone like Glenn Youngkin jumps in, a Republican like that, we're going to have a serious challenge that the party that has committed itself, right, to authoritarianism will have a very real chance to win the White House. A very serious chance to win. And you guys must understand, it's not just the MAGA people. They are gerrymandering, they're rigging rules across this nation. And wherever you stand on the political spectrum, if you're committed to democracy, you cannot allow those folk to take the reins of power. No matter where you stand, if you're committed to democracy, they cannot win the presidency. They cannot they cannot hold the reins of power. We have to fight as aggressively as we can for the values that define our way of life.
Amen. Amen is what we're saying. Amen. And I just wanted to add an additional note of thanks, something that I hadn't said in the recorded video. We had some additional help, so Ben was helping us with the technology, and thank you so much, Ben, for making it available to all who are joining us. Really appreciate it. And I did just want to invite everyone, this is not the end of the conversation. This is will be continued in the building next to us. Again, there are elevators, so we can direct you to those, or you can take the stairs. We'll have food, a reception, a book signing, time to have good conversation together and enjoy this evening. And I wanted to be sure to invite you back tomorrow for the salvation part. So we will gather here again at 9 o'clock in the morning. There'll be coffee and some snacks. We'll begin at 9:30, and then afterwards we'll have, again, some question and book signing. But thank you so much for joining us this evening, and we hope to see you again tomorrow. We might let Eddie just kind of sneak this way, Eddie, so you can get to the food and books, and we will all meet you there. Thanks, everyone.